Hey there tuners and tunies, and today I'm annihilating any friendships I have left. What, so you're doing nothing then? Ever since my Fortnite video, which managed to garner a great response by the way, thanks guys, I have been plagued by responses from my friends, all telling me how wrong I was, trying desperately to justify their view, without really having any evidence to back it up. Except Scott. Scott was cool. However, there were a few points that they did mention that I forgot to consider, ones that I brought up that were flat out wrong, or points that I could have worded a lot differently, or didn't explain well enough. Today, my goal is to rectify that, and to create the strongest argument I have for why Fortnite is overrated. But before I begin, and I know it seems useless at this point to bring it up, but I know if I don't then someone will still comment it, no, I do not hate Fortnite because I am bad at it. Many of my favourite games of all time, such as TF2, I am god awful at, even after 150 plus hours of play. And I know by bringing this up, I'll have a few people take this itself as a joke. I think I was eating once with a friend, and he brought it up, attempting to make a mockery out of it without having the faintest clue that the point was brought up in the first place to stop idiots like him ignoring all my arguments in the first place. So in the end, he was just sitting there laughing at himself. I'm not going to name names here, but seriously, you know who you are. And in the end, you're just making a mockery out of yourself. And also, another clarification, one I didn't make in my last video, these videos are not trying to discredit your view in any way. I'm not trying to stop your enjoyment of a game, no, not by any means. I'm just trying to explain the reasoning behind my view, my personal view, and if you let that affect your view, well, that's your choice. It's not my fault. And finally, before you continue watching, if you haven't seen my first video, I would highly suggest watching it. I bring up a lot of points in this video that will be completely redundant if you haven't watched my first video. Thank you. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, we can finally focus on the first point of the day, which is... Jared, what does that say?
I think it says combat.
Oh, really? It's quite hard to read considering it was taken out of context. Oh my god, this point! People focused in on this one to no end! Of course you had people telling me that the point was just incorrect, that strategy was a major factor in combat, and that weapon rarity didn't really influence the fight that much. Yeah, kind of fair. I didn't really explain my point all too well. But then you had actual idiots come into the discussion who did such atrocities as telling me that my video was just 10 minutes of me complaining about the combat with no merits, telling me all about how I didn't watch Ninja, so how could I know the complex strategy behind Fortnite, and then having the gall to bring up a bunch of points that I completely contradicted in my own video. Yeah, this was Dale. Like, I'm not going to show all the DMs for privacy's sake mostly, and also out of pity, but I think this one message really sums up the whole discussion, honestly. Yes, of course, you can all see what he meant, anybody with a brain cell can see that, but come on, seriously, when you're trying to have an argument with someone, actually, you know, consider if your argument is a mess or not. Actually build up a response with points to discredit my own, without just shouting random things that pop into your head. Not realising that every point you brought up either doesn't make any sense or makes sense but was already discredited by an argument elsewhere in the video. If you want to know how to argue with someone, just look at this screenshot from a DM I had with Scott, which was far better. You want to know why? It's because he built an argument up without saying anything stupid, and actually respected my opinion. I know, what a groundbreaking concept! I'd like to award Scott the not being an idiot who disregards points like a soiled nappy award. Now, let's annoy some people. In my original argument, I pointed out how the rarity system is garbage, explaining how 9 times out of 10 a legendary weapon will beat an uncommon weapon of the same type. Since some people thought it necessary to disregard logic and just go insane over this point, let me rephrase it. No, by saying 9 out of 10, I do not mean that you will win with a rare weapon 9 out of 10 times. It's an exaggeration in order to get my point across, that being that a higher weapon damage would beat out a lower weapon damage in the majority of situations. However, this does of course assume a variety of factors, such as the amount of health someone has, their awareness of the situation, someone's ability to aim, the fact that 2 people could get into a fight with completely different weapon types, i.e. a rare shotgun versus an uncommon AK-47 at a distance. Who do you think is going to win there? But ignoring all of that, ignoring all of the possible things that could affect the outcome of a fight, it is basic human logic that a weapon that does more damage would beat out a weapon that does not. I don't even need to have played Fortnite to have that knowledge, but I did. 4 hours of my life wasted, and what's my conclusion? High rarity weapons typically beat lower rarity weapons. Wow, really? I could never have expected that! Even if this is just a problem I'm having and no one else does, then surely that means that there is simply no point to the rarity system? If all the weapons are apparently on the same level anyway, then what's the point for going to Loot Lake then? What's the point in finding these rarer weapons? If your logic is true, then there is no point to it at all. You're just getting excited over a weapon that does no extra damage to an enemy. There is of course a purpose to the system, making the need to find better weapons more necessary, but it is implemented so poorly that it completely breaks the game for me. However, there is a way to fix it, something which I'll discuss later in the video. And before I forget, get out of my face with that complex combat shit. My friends were complaining about it in a DM, telling me to watch Ninja, he's an actually skilled player unlike you, or something like that. I then proceeded to show them this tutorial from Uncle Dane, a high-level TF2 engineer player, who just so happened to upload the same day as I did. I'd highly suggest checking it out if you're interested, but if you're not, the video essentially covers the basics for any engineer playing on one of the new maps, Moss Rock. Fun fact, this goes on for 20 minutes, covering ideal sentry, dispenser and teleporter placements. Reminder, this is for one class, one map, on a fairly basic level. Now, let's look at Fortnite's combat. Potentially 5 very similar weapons at your disposal. Ranged weapons, mid-ranged weapons, close combat weapons. Traps, explosives. These things, the terrible construction. Complex. Like, I'm sorry, from what I've seen, Ninja is highly skilled at what he does, but really, judging by what he has to work with, that isn't very hard. And no, memorising where crates are and being able to do a 360 no-scope is not skill. That's like saying knowing where the health and ammo are on 2-4 is the equivalent to being a Grandmaster Champion. You know something? I've just realised I've compared TF2 an awful lot to Fortnite without ever even explaining what TF2 is. Oops! If you remember correctly, I have frequently compared Fortnite to Team Fortress 2, a 10-year-old game created by Valve, the guys behind Steam, Portal, Counter-Strike, and Half-Life. TF2 is a class and team-based shooter in a similar vein to Overwatch, but a whole lot better. It has 9 classes, each with greatly varying playstyles, which can all be customised to your liking with different hats, outfits, taunts, and most importantly of all, weapons. So many weapons. While some are just basic reskins of others like many of the melee weapons, around a good 75% of them have differing stats from one another, like here with the Scout stock scattergun, which does 60 damage on hit, But one of the unlocks, the Force of Nature, does 65 damage as well as a knockback effect, but is weaker at long range and has a drastically reduced clip size, limiting you to 2 shots per clip instead of 6 like normal. This encourages drastically different playstyles, making combat much more varied and fun, and allowing it to feel fresh and new, even if you're 1,000 hours into the game. A similar thing can be said of the class system, which also greatly affects gameplay. Out of the 9 to choose from, all of them are drastically different from one another, with the only similarities being their attack range and their type: attack, defense, or support. Both of these systems go a long way in making TF2 fun and enjoyable to play for hours and hours at a time, as nothing ever feels too samey or generic, and every situation is unique, so your approach must constantly adapt and shift. And this is exactly what Fortnite needs. This weapon system, the one that apparently makes the combat much more interesting and difficult, flat out doesn't work. It has been simplified down to the point where there is basically nothing of substance left, and the few differences it has to other shooters are simply just terrible additions. So, how do we fix it? Well, start by removing the rarity system, and replace it with one similar to TF2's, simplifying it a little while giving every weapon a type, making it clear what each weapon does and how it differs from the generic weapon types. Then, instead of having them just as unlocks, place them around the world in the place of the terrible rarity system, giving players an incentive to still explore in order to find weapons that fit their personal playstyle, but without overpowering players who just got lucky and found an ultra powerful weapon. You could even add in classes to the game, something which already exists in the main game, the PvE campaign Save the World, but for some reason not in Battle Royale. Maybe don't make the classes quite as varied as in something like TF2, but allow players to pick and choose a class based on how they want to play. Like, one character could be able to build stuff for half the price and get an advantage out of close combat weapons like the shotgun, but be much slower and heal less per shield potion or bandage. This would make the playing field much more unique and the combat far more enjoyable as a whole, encouraging adaptability and discouraging luck-based mechanics. Right, so I'm rectifying my argument there. But I feel like I'm missing something. What could it be? Or you could spend your time creating a crab demon like this guy. God, was I really that stupid? Yes, the construction tools, something which I really didn't give enough focus in my original video, even less so than my introduction and conclusion, and really I should have given more time to them. Why, you might ask? It's because they deserve to be complained about more. The building tools are the one part of Fortnite that, out of anything, needs to be fixed the most, since if they were actually well designed, they could instantly fix the majority of issues raised in this video. The main problem with them is the clunky UI that they inhabit, which is particularly troubling when they need to be used quickly and effectively. Instead of just having a simple submenu that gets the job done, you've got a clunky mess that makes me ashamed to think about how much the designer got paid for it. In something like TF2, I'm sorry for bringing it up again, the engineer's building menu is a little clunky, yes, but it's rare that you will have to use it in situations where you have to work quickly, like in Fortnite. Buildings are best created away from the action anyway, to avoid being initially destroyed, so a speedy UI is only something needed when using a weapon such as the Gunslinger, which requires you to quickly place buildings down in an offensive situation. Fortnite is the opposite, requiring fast and efficient use for them to be useful to any degree. Get good, scrub, you might be yelling at your phone screens. You're just not good enough to be able to use them correctly. And to be fair, they are right. A broken mess of a UI can be mastered over time to the point where you can be a building whiz like this guy here. However, the question I pose to you is, well, why should I bother? If the UI is going to be poorly designed, then why should I spend my time trying to master it? If I'm going to have to waste my time for 20 or so hours to get to a confident enough point where the game can somewhat improve, then why should I bother? When your combat so heavily hinges on something so poorly designed as the building controls, then you've failed as a designer. And yes, when you're on PC, the controls are far better, as with practically anything else, but it still doesn't get away from the fact that the system is heavily flawed and needs more work. Oh, and before I forget, yes, this is not a player creation in Fortnite, but that doesn't discredit my entire argument, does it? And with that, I think I've done it. I've perfectly rectified my original argument, so no counter-arguments can be made. Now, I was going to talk about the squads mode, but me and my friends both agree that it's a complete waste of time. Right, guys? You can always rely on my friends, oxygen and carbon dioxide, to crack me up. Please help, I'm cripplingly lonely.